After studying this module, you shall be able to know more about symbolic interactionism and its related concepts, learn how various philosophies and thoughts influence this theory, and evaluate its origins, themes, and assumptions. Introduction to Symbolic Interactionism. Symbolic interactionism is an American sociological perspective with its roots in the philosophy of pragmatism. It identified with scholars such as William James and Herbert Mead, and its views living things as attempting to make adjustments to their surroundings. As philosophers, they are interested in the fundamental questions of philosophy, such as what is truth, what is knowledge, how do we acquire knowledge, etc. In seeking answers to these questions, they argue that an idea's truth or a statement's meaning depends on its practical consequences. An idea is true if it works. Pragmatists see all living creatures as trying to meet the demands of their environments in practical ways. They think that knowledge must always meet practical tests of usefulness. This view emphasizes the consequences of ideas rather than their logical elegance or internal consistency. Pragmatists see living things as probing and testing their environments. Therefore, truth is not absolute but is always relative to the needs of organisms. Questions of how members of the species know and interact with their environment are matters of great moment, not merely peripheral concerns. Knowing and acting in the pragmatist's view are intimately linked. We act on the basis of our ideas about the world. The reality of the world is not merely something that is out there waiting to be discovered. Rather, it is actively created as we act in and toward the world. Philosophical pragmatism is an important precursor of symbolic interactionism. George Mead is considered as the most important intellectual ancestor for all interactionists. His theory of mind profoundly shaped and continues to shape the work of symbolic interactionists. Origins and themes. The origins. The establishment of the social psychological view of symbolic interaction in sociology is such that Gus Fields remarked, "We didn't think symbolic interactionism was a perspective in sociology. We thought it was sociology." Core themes of symbolic interaction. Symbolic interaction is basically a theory of human nature, a view that developed among the Scottish moral philosophers as a reaction against prevailing pessimistic views of human beings. The various themes are: Axiom A. All humans share a common nature that is unique among all animals but obscured by human social differences. Axiom B. Humans generally behave in socially proper ways. Axiom C. Human conduct is self-regulated. Postulate C1. A person is a social animal. Postulate C2. Fundamental to society is communication. Postulate C3. Fundamental to person is mental life. Postulate C4. The key link between society and person is the looking glass self. Postulate C5. Self-regulation is a process. The main assumptions of the symbolic interaction theory are: first, people are unique creatures because of their ability to use symbols. Second, people become distinctively human through their interaction with others. Third, people are conscious and self-reflective beings who actively shape their own behavior. Fourth, people are purposeful creatures who act in and toward situations. Fifth, human society consists of people engaging in symbolic interaction. Sixth, the social act should be the fundamental unit of social psychological analysis. Seventh, to understand people's social acts, we need to use methods that enable us to discern the meanings they attribute to these acts. The symbolic interactionist frame. The symbolic interactionist frame has three important concepts. First, imagery. According to the symbolic interactionist perspective, society is a web of interaction, the reciprocal influence of persons taking each other into account as they act. Interaction is symbolic in terms of the meanings persons develop in interaction itself. The environment of human action and interaction is symbolically defined. Persons interact using the symbols developed in their interaction and act through the communication of these symbols. Society summarizes such interactions. The symbolic capacity of humans implies that they think and manipulate symbols internally. They can think about themselves and in doing so come to have a self which is both shaped by the social process and entering into social process. Thinking occurs in the form of internal conversation, making use of symbols that emerge out of the social process. This imagery contains the idea that humans are active and creative, not only passive responders to external environmental forces. The environments in which they act and interact are symbolic environments. The symbols attaching to human and non-human environments are produced in interaction. The premises. Three versions of the premises are provided because they differ in an important way. Bloomer. The premises are what define symbolic interactionism. The three premises on which symbolic interactionism rests, that is, the principles that are of defining significance for the frame according to Bloomer are: human beings act toward things, physical objects, other humans, categories of humans, institutions, ideals, activities of others, and the situations encountered on the basis of these meanings that the things have for them. Second, meanings arise in the process of interaction between people. The meanings of things are social products growing out of how persons act toward one another with regard to the things. And third, the use of meanings occurs through a process of interpretation in which the actors communicate with themselves, selecting, checking, regrouping, transforming and using meanings to form and guide their interactions and actions in situations in which they find themselves. Stryker's premises reflect what persons presenting themselves as symbolic interactionists have in common. Stryker drawing on Bloom's treatment, gives these premises a somewhat different, albeit closely related. He asserts that the premises shared among symbolic interactionists are: an adequate account of human behavior must incorporate the point of view of actors engaged in the behavior. Second, social interaction is fundamental, with both social and self structure emergent from the interaction. And persons' reflexivity, their responses to themselves, link larger social processes to the interactions in which they engage. Third, Snow's range of ideas in the collective work of contemporary interactionism. Snow's symbolic interactionist principles are symbolization, emergence, and human agency. The principles of symbolization indicate that events, conditions, artifacts, individuals, aggregation of individuals, and other features of people's environments which take on meanings and become objects for persons to elicit feelings and actions. He notes that this principle is the heart of Bloom's conception of symbolic interactionism. The principle of human agency looks at humans as active and willful players who construct their lines of action. Symbolic interactionists tend to see structural and cultural constraints as circumstances which human actors take into account rather than determinants of lines of action. Conceptualizations. The symbolic interactionist imagery and underlying premises described incorporate many of the concepts of the framework. Central is meaning, the conceptualizations of which begin with the social act involving behavior of at least two people taking each other into account in the process of resolving some issue or problem. Gestures which imply the same future behavior to actors and those perceiving them are significant symbols. Symbols reflect plans for action, organizing behavior with reference to what they symbolize. To interact with others in a coherent, organized way, meanings need to be at least tentatively assigned to the situations in which persons find themselves and to the parts of those situations. Without such definitions of the situation, behavior is likely to be disorganized. To respond reflexively to oneself by defining who one is to have a self. The meaning of self develops in and through interaction, and self implies a plan of action. Role taking refers to a process by which persons anticipate the responses of others, in effect putting themselves in the place of others to see the world as they do. Interaction sometimes predominantly also reflects role making, modifying or creating roles by defining performances responsive to roles imputed to others. Role making occurs when roles lack concreteness or consistency, but actors must organize their behavior on the assumption that they are unequivocal. The looking glass self. Neurological evidence based on EEGs supports the idea that humans have a social brain, meaning there are components of the human brain that govern social interaction. These parts of the brain begin developing in early childhood and aid humans in understanding how other people think. In symbolic interactionism, this is known as reflected appraisals or the looking glass self. It refers to our ability to think about how other people will think about us. In 1902, Charles Horton Cooley developed the social psychological concept of the looking glass self. The term was first used in his work, Human Nature and the Social Order. There are three main components of the looking glass self. We imagine how we must appear to others. We imagine the judgment of that appearance, and we develop ourselves through the judgments of others. Cooley clarified this concept, stating that society is an interweaving and interworking of mental cells. In hypothesizing the framework for the looking glass self, Cooley said the mind is mental because the human mind is social. As children, humans begin to define themselves within the context of their socializations. The child learns that the symbol of his or her crying will elicit a response from his or her parents, not only when they are in need of necessities, but also as a symbol to receive their attention. An example of the looking glass self is a person trying to put on clothes before going out with friends. Some people may not think much about how others will think about their clothing choices, but others can spend quite a bit of time considering what they are going to wear. While they are deciding, the dialogue taking place inside their mind is usually a dialogue between their self, that is, that portion of their identity that calls itself the I, and that person's internalized understanding of their friends in society, which is a generalized other. An indicator of mature socialization is when an individual quite accurately predicts how other people think about him or her. Such an individual has incorporated the social into the self. Needs analysis. The key feature in needs analysis is that the human being has a self. In declaring that the human being has a self, Mead had in mind that the human being can be the object of his own actions. Each of us is familiar with actions of this sort in which the human being gets angry with himself, takes pride in himself, argues with himself, or sets goal for himself, etc. Mead regards this ability of the human being to act toward himself as the central mechanism with which the human being faces and deals with the world. This mechanism enables the human being to guide his actions by what he knows. Anything of which a human being is conscious is something which he is indicating to himself. Conversely, anything of which he is not conscious is something which he is not indicating to himself. Now, according to Mead, the significance of making indications to oneself is of paramount importance. Now, this importance lies along two lines. First, to indicate something is to extricate it from its seeing, to hold it apart, to give it a meaning, or in Mead's language, to make it an object. An object is different from a stimulus. Instead of having an intrinsic character which acts on the individual and which can be identified apart from the individual, its character or meaning is conferred on it by the individual. The second important implication of the fact that the human being makes indications to himself is that his action is constructed instead of being a mere release. Whatever the action in which he is engaged, the human individual proceeds by pointing out to himself the divergent things which have to be taken into account in the course of his action. Self-indication is a moving communicative process in which the individual notes things, assesses them, gives them a meaning, and decides to act on the basis of the meaning. In the process of self-indication, the individual points out to himself and interprets the appearance of things, such as noting a given social demand, observing that he is hungry, etc. By virtue of indicating such things to himself, he places himself over against them and is able to act back against them. His behavior, accordingly, is not a result of such things as environmental pressures, stimuli, motives, etc., but arises from how he interprets these things in the action which he is constructing. It is through this process that the human being constructs his conscious actions. According to Mead, the formation of action by the individual through a process of self-indication always takes place in a social context. Group action takes the form of fixing together of individual lines of action. Each individual aligns his action to the action of others by ascertaining what they are doing. For Mead, this is done by the individual taking the role of others, either the role of a specific person or the role of a group, which can be referred to as Mead's generalized other. In taking such roles, the individual seeks to ascertain the intention or direction of the acts of others. He forms and aligns his own action on the basis of such interpretation of the acts of other people. This is the fundamental way in which group action takes place in human society. Methods and research. The majority of interactionist research uses qualitative research methods like participant observation to study the aspects of social interaction and or individuals' selves. Interaction analysis and context existing source analysis are also used. Participant observation allows researchers to access symbols and meanings. Close contact and immersion in the everyday activities of the participants is necessary for understanding the meanings of actions, defining the situations and the process that actors construct the situation through their interaction. In most cases, they make use of their values in choosing what to study. However, they seek to be objective in how they conduct the research. Therefore, the symbolic interaction approach is a micro-level orientation focusing in close-up interaction in specific situations. Interactionist concepts that have gained widespread usage include the definition of the situation, emotion work, impression management, looking glass self, and total institution. Semiology is connected to this discipline, but unlike those elements of semiology which are about the structures of language, interactionists typically are more interested in the ways in which the meaning is fluid and ambiguous. The scope and application. The theory is used in effective evaluation of human interaction. Different meanings can easily lead to communication problems. Problems can arise if the lines of communication are not open and assumptions are made. Criticisms. Symbolic interactionists are often criticized for being overly impressionistic in their research methods and unsystematic in their theories. It is argued that the theory is not one theory but rather the framework for many different theories. Some theorists have a problem with symbolic interaction theory due to its lack of testability. These objections, combined with the fairly narrow focus of interactionist research on small group interactions and other social psychological issues, have relegated the interactionist camp to a minority position among the sociologists. Much of this criticism arose during the 1970s in the US when quantitative approaches to sociology were dominant. To summarize, symbolic interactionism is an American sociological perspective with roots in the philosophy of pragmatism. This philosophical tradition views living things as attempting to make practical adjustments to their surroundings. Some of the main themes are that all humans have a common nature that is unique among all animals but obscured by human social differences. Humans generally behave in socially proper ways, etc. Some of the assumptions of the symbolic interaction theory are that people are unique creatures because of the ability to use symbols. People become distinctively human through their interactions with others, etc. The symbolic interactionist frame consists of imagery, premises, conceptualizations. Cooley developed the social psychological concept of the looking glass self. The key feature in needs analysis is that the human being has a self. The majority of interactionist research uses qualitative research methods. Symbolic interactionists are often criticized for being overly impressionistic in their research methods and somewhat unsystematic in their theories. It is argued that the theory is not one theory but rather the framework for many different theories.